Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today and enjoyed these stories. If you want to support my channel, then make sure you check out my Patreon where you can get early access to my stories, and make sure you check out my podcast, which is also in the description below. For today I'd like to share this. Remember that if you're struggling with mental health or you're trying to achieve something generally and things don't always go your way, it can be easy to doubt or blame yourself, but just remember, not everything's in your control. And everything does happen for a reason, so even if things feel like they're going bad now, remember it's just a part of the process, and better days will come, you just have to be consistent. So I hope that can help some people, and if you're celebrating Christmas, let me know how you're getting into the Christmas spirit below. I hope you're all great and enjoyed these stories. Take care and I'll speak to you all soon. Now it's been a good couple of months since this happened. I live in a quiet village in the south of Germany next to our village, where you can find a rather large forest with lots of hiking and biking tracks leading through it. When I was little, either my aunt or dad took me through the woods for a walk every second day virtually. It basically became a habit for me. Now, I usually went on walks with music during the daytime, but one night during the full moon and clear sky, I felt a little brave and bored at the same time and decided to go for a stroll. I grabbed my flashlight just in case, and my phone before I headed out. Halfway there though, on my usual walk, I come across a little bridge that led to the forest. One of my favourite songs actually faded out before the next one could play, and I heard the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my life. He actually forces me to take off my headphones, thinking that maybe a boar or something is stepping through towards me. And I'm pretty terrified. I now turn on my flashlight trying to figure out what's happening, and I see something among the trees next to an entry path, a snow white, skinny as hell, pitch black-eyed thing staring at me. I've never felt this horrified in my life before. My insides told me that if I took another step, I'd pass away. I didn't care for what was happening as I turned around and ran for my life home, consistently having the feeling of being chased. Ever since that, when I'm home alone, I feel like I'm being watched and really uneasy. On several occasions, I've actually heard footsteps outside on our porch and garden chairs being pushed around. I have no idea what I've seen or what to think about it. If anybody had any explanation for this, I'd really be grateful. So me and two of my friends decide to go to Tunnel 2, which is like the shortest walk, but that is because you have to park in the middle of literally nowhere and walk through a pretty dense wood line. So we get out of the car, start to walk up the path to the tunnel, and my friend, we'll call him N, has this huge and high-powered spotlight which we were using because it's much better than my little tack flashlight. N's spotlight can reach really far, like half a mile, so I decided to flash it back and towards my friend's car. I then see two eyes in the wood line behind the car, like halfway up this tree. My friend's like, whoa, that's pretty high up. We're like, yeah, let's go and check that out. We don't see the eyes, so we assume it's an animal or something that had ran off. My friend has the light and says, hey, it's over there. It's coming closer now. Now, it was 100% humanoid with its head. Then we see the arms. At this point, we get sketched out and say, let's go back to the car. We're about 100 yards from the car now. We get to the break of the dense wood line and are probably 75 meters from the car, and I see the eyes again with this flashlight. And they're even closer now. At this point, we've got our knives ready. We're really scared. R then goes, we gotta get to the car, but it's right over there on the other side of the road. We get to the metal rebar blockade type thing that blocks the path so no cars can drive through, and we don't see the eyes. We stop and we start scanning the wood line on the other side of the road, and I see to our left an eye peeking at us as it darts back behind the tree. It now re-peaks and I see 100% a humanoid head and arm as it darts behind another tree. At this point we book it to the car. We get in the car and then winds down the back window and start scanning with the light. We see it 20 yards from the car with its head in its arm and its foot wrapping around a tree again. R is in basically full panic now, as it keeps getting closer, so he floors it. N vouches it was like Bigfoot. R to this day says that he has no idea what it could have been and doesn't want to think about it. Honestly, I want to say Bigfoot, but I'm skeptical, but I genuinely don't know. It was 7 to 8 feet tall and kept getting closer to us, and it wasn't an owl and it wasn't a bear. And it was not a human, because human eyes don't refract light in the same way that this thing was. N refuses to go back to the tunnel, he's that scared. It's probably one of the most terrifying moments of my life. The thing is that it wasn't even that scary, but we're so scared on the way home and have this horrible feeling of dread and terror, even as we pull up to the trail. Now, we've all agreed that it's the strangest feeling of our entire lives, like an immediate, insurmountable dread that night as we get out of there in the car. I still have no idea what it could have been even now. Now this happened in the mid-90s, about 20 to 50 miles east of Sweet Home in Oregon. Now I was a child of about 10 years when this encounter occurred. I've forgotten about it until recently. A dream sparked my memory. I was camping with my family in the mountains outside of Sweet Home. I was doing what all children do when camping and exploring the area, generally following the nearby river, when I come upon a section of the river with 2 steep banks separated by a ravine cut by the river. I vaguely remembered looking across to the opposite side of the river and saw a couple of small, pale, emaciated looking people with pointy ears climbing up the steep embankment on all fours, and I remembered wanting to jump across to try and get a better look, but being really creeped out at the same time. The whole experience was really surreal. Even now it's a hazy memory. I don't remember them wearing any kinds of clothes, but they may have been wearing loincloths. I didn't see their faces because I only noticed them as they're moving away from me and facing away from me. No hair or fur whatsoever. Reminds me of the movie Monsters in Descent. I had the strangest experience a few weeks back at my local 7-Eleven early in the morning. I and my fiance are both in our car heading to a 7-Eleven to get the usual prerequisites that the morning requires: caffeine, donuts, etc. We pulled into the parking lot and park in front of the store, and we're about to get out and we look at the car next to us. The driver is normal enough. Your average looking 20-something Caucasian female, but sitting next to her was something really odd. A male, Caucasian, glasses on, looking for the most part towards everyone, except for one major difference. He had short, goat-like horns coming out of his head, and they were grey and fat at the base and got thinner as they got up higher, like maybe a baby goat or just nubs. Now, we quickly turn our heads to verify that we've both seen the same thing. A moment later, and instead of a horned man sitting next to us is a large collie dog mix. Now, the woman driving, mind you, seems oblivious to all of this and is doing her makeup in the mirror. Baffled, we simply pull back out and go home and take the next day off work. We spend the day napping, and in between the naps, I'm very tired and try and figure out what I've seen. Now it's in the middle of Kansas City in a busy parking lot, and it was really odd to have seen that, but nobody else seemed to have picked up on it. If it was just myself, I'd think maybe it was me, but I'm not sure. So this happened in about 1990 in southeast Michigan. Twice I saw a tall, black humanoid-shaped figure that ran like the wind and appeared to almost fly across the ground. Both times it was dark out, and both times it scared the heck out of me, and my friends I was with. I was with different friends, one at the first sighting and another at the second, but they both saw it too. Back up about 4 years ago before I saw the creature, a friend of mine was riding a mini bike. My brother and I were getting cryptic phone calls from someone our age who wouldn't tell us his name. I can't remember what the talk was about, but it was really creepy. Then one day, I hung up the phone and my brother says, "Who was it?" I told him he wouldn't say. Now my brother guessed it was someone who passed away. Then in 2002, I go to see the movie and I get big chills. Nothing bad really ever happened to me, my friends, or that town. Besides that, we experienced the same thing at West Virginia, just like in the movie. Anybody else had anything similar happening? When I was about 7, I wasn't sure exactly how it happened, but I fell asleep on the couch, which was next to the window, looking into the front yard. This happened 3 nights in a row. I looked out of the window and saw something peeking out from behind one of the trees. It stood about 8 feet tall or so. I could somewhat make out the features because of the street light. It had red glowing eyes, wings that came to a point, and honestly looked scary. Well, I thought about it until I was about 23. Then I had the exact same dream one night, but I was in my 23-year-old's body. I saw my younger self sleeping and my dad sleeping on the other end of the couch. The trailer was exactly the same, which is odd because I didn't remember it until this dream. I couldn't move, but I could crouch down. I looked out the window and saw it staring at me once more. Now this happened a few years ago and I'll recount it as accurately as I can. So a few years ago, myself and my bandmates played a show in northeastern Kansas. If you're familiar with the area, you might be aware of a certain purple-coloured cat mascot in the college town that we played. We drove back to our homes in Kansas City and chose to take the back roads and state highways instead of travelling further south to the interstate highway. As we're driving in a relatively remote area of northeast Kansas, we were driving along a cornfield which took up the entire left side of the highway for several miles. I was driving, my bassist was in the passenger seat, and our singer was in the back seat distracted by the phone. As we're driving, my bassist and I suddenly see something sitting on the cornfield to our left, a huge figure, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, suddenly darting into the cornfield on the left, just as my headlight revealed it. If you've seen the movie Signs, then you're familiar with the scene where he shines his flashlight and briefly sees the leg of an alien creature suddenly retreating into the cornfield. It was honestly exactly like that. Now turning as if it just realised that we've noticed it. The figure, as far as I remember, stood 7 to 8 feet tall, and from the brief glimpse we caught of it, appears to be covered in feathers and is owl-like. I distinctly remember myself and the bassist swearing, saying, "Did you see that?" We don't actually stop to investigate because it's close to 1 AM now, and we want to get back home, and what was that? I don't know if anybody's heard anything familiar happening in that area before, but I cannot make out what it could have been. Hello everyone. So I was riding my motorcycle on a small mountain pass in western Switzerland. The night was pretty clear, thanks to the moon and the very snowy mountains who were reflecting the light. But there was no snow where I was. It was basically all on higher land. I was driving pretty fast because of the cold air, which was hurting my knees and fingers, and I had a strong urge to get back in my warm bed when, in a turn, just before a bridge, I see what appears to be a wounded man, kneeling by the side of the road, holding his stomach. Car crashes are common on this road, so I slowed up to see if everything was okay when the guy stood up really quick. I only saw him clearly when he crosses the road thanks to my headlights, and it was creepy. It looked like a living rotten corpse, and I only see a glimpse of his face. It was like the only thing that come to my mind to define it is a plate of pasta. Now, I saw it running through the field on all fours, then standing on two legs, looking at me for a second or two, then walking away calmly into the woods. I immediately took a small trowel and crossed into the woods, but I never saw him again. Even if we have strange creatures roaming around, I don't know what this could have been. When I was around 12 or 13, I was in middle school at the time, waiting around for a bus to stop and the sun was rising. I was mindlessly looking around when I captured a glimpse of something quite tall in a tree. It looked heavy set and I can make out wings. I saw it move a little and I freaked out. Now, I ended up running towards the bus, but I turn around and the creature is gone. I figured I'd totally imagined the whole thing. I was still very tired, and it was early or whatever. Fast forward to a few weeks later, it's about 9 PM and dark outside. I'm in my room watching TV when all of a sudden I hear banging and yelling at my window. I look out my window to see my best friend. I open the window and, like a crazy person, climbs through telling me to close the window. Turns out that he claimed to have saw something in the park with huge wings and it was chasing him from the park. This is the last time I heard about the creature until my sister called a month ago or so, asking, "What is the creature I saw?" I told her it was years ago and I can't remember a whole lot, and I figured it was a hallucination, but she starts telling me about a story her husband was telling her about a flying creature that chased him and his friends at the exact same park in the middle of the night. What we recounted seemed pretty accurate to my experience. To the best of my knowledge, this creature reminded me of Gagalor. I can try and recount more, but I don't know what it could have been. During the fires that consumed Mount Charleston, Nevada, my parents drove out to the mountain where the roads were clear. They described the wildlife to be running around the cars as they drove through the open road. My dad told my mum to stop the car, and he got out and started walking through the desert. He realized that the wilderness is running, including snakes and other deadly animals. He witnesses a moose/elk in the distance that was looking at him, but walked off in the direction of the rabbits and other wildlife. As he gets in the vehicle, both my parents and father describe seeing a tall man crouched over in front of the car, wings draped over his back. As he stands, he faces them. His wingspan is wide enough to cover the entire two-lane road and lifts him off the ground in 4 swooshes. Apparently he's quite muscular, with broad shoulders and arms and legs. But the face was mesmerizing. They could only describe it as not exactly human, more man-bird-like. The Mothman was a topic of the discussion to both of them. I wonder if anybody else has had anything similar that they've experienced. The setting is 1940, and my grandpa at the time was a young boy. Now, his parents had lived through the Great Depression, so it wasn't really a big thing to him to have to worry about money. He'd actually spent the majority of his life just being cautious of things. He's one of those who would literally save every penny. I think once you've gone through an experience like that, it really truly never does leave you. Now, he had quite a few different jobs. Back then it was really difficult to actually maintain a job, but one that he really liked was being what we now call a park ranger. He said he liked the fact that he would have regular jobs and he wouldn't have to worry so much. This is before people become as infatuated with technology too, of course, so people were more in touch with their surroundings, and being out there in the woods wouldn't really matter too much to him. Now, he had a number of strange experiences that he couldn't believe himself, which he's passed down to me over the years. One was while he was stationed and they were building a new cabin for someone. Basically, one of the locals lost their home in a fire and they were building a new one. He said the guy was really nice. Now, they'd actually been working with him for a number of weeks. He got to know the guy and said that he was really friendly. Apparently, he would never really say too much. My grandfather thought it was because of the fire that he didn't really talk to people so much, and he said he appreciated that his mind was probably in a completely different place to everybody else's. I mean, heck, he lost everything, what can you expect? And this was before insurance was really as common as it is today, and not everybody could afford it back then, so he was definitely struggling. Apparently he had some interesting stories, but he would never really talk to people much about them. So they go about building this thing, and eventually he doesn't take much notice and just talks to his other colleagues. He said it was backbreaking work. Apparently because of where this thing was being built, they had to carry everything by hand, and that could be an exhausting prosper. But every so often, that guy would just show up out of nowhere and offer them help. He really said to him, "No man, you've just got to rest and let us do it." But it didn't happen. He would always come and help them. He said they were pretty close to finishing, and one day it rained really heavily and it was annoying because they didn't have the roof structure completely in place, so there were holes and things leaking down. He said that he was sitting there drinking coffee with that other guy, and again he didn't say anything. He just said that "I've got to go now," and got up and walked out. He said goodbye and to have a nice evening, and just sat about drinking the rest of the coffee. He couldn't figure out where the guy had went though. He obviously didn't have a home as such to go to, so it was pretty hard to track him. Apparently, nobody could actually figure out where this guy was going to. He would just get up without warning and seemingly vanish sometimes. But again, not too much to think here. So that happens for a while, and eventually, my grandpa comes in again for work one day. He comes in and starts to make coffee and realizes that the other guy had left his coffee on the floor from the night before. Now the second he touches the cup, instantly everything looks different. He's no longer standing in a small cabin, but now instead standing in a much larger one. He looks around and he says he was really confused. He thought he'd actually gone to the wrong place and just wasn't really focused on his surroundings enough, because apparently there was a whole house here, and it looked relatively new, but not brand new, kind of like it was inhabited. He said he went around saying hello, going from room to room, trying to figure out if anybody else was there with him, but he wouldn't get a reply. Now apparently he actually found it really spooky that there was some kind of radio playing in the background, but he couldn't figure out what language it was speaking in. It was definitely weird. He had a look and literally explored everywhere but couldn't find a person, and he was now worried that he'd somehow gone into the wrong house and not realised it. You know, this was back in the day, so not everything was really done with planning permission or anything. It was completely normal to have houses like this. I guess people didn't want to pay taxes or something. Then he realises something's odd. There's smoke. It literally seems to have just come out of nowhere, and he can't see the source of a fire, but it made him panic. He then turns around and realises that part of the structure is completely burning, and the roof is about to collapse. He sprints outside, panicking, not knowing what to do. He then turns around, and he can see what he can only describe as some kind of spaghetti-looking man, completely burned and charred, who raises up towards the window, then falls back down again, disappearing. Apparently, my grandfather then goes to wipe his eyes and look round for help and turns back and the whole place is gone, like it never happened. My grandfather was very God-fearing and he starts praying immediately for protection and starts holding the cross that he was wearing. He gets really spooked out and turns around and sprints back. He then explains to me that apparently he just went home. He said that he couldn't really bear the thought of it all and not knowing what happened or if it was real. Well, eventually he goes back to work the next day and apparently that's when he says, "Where's the other guy we're building the house for?" The other workers there look at him confused and he says, the other guy. They ask for his name and he eventually figures it out and they say, "No, he died long ago. We're building up the house for his family, not him." And my grandfather was absolutely dumbstruck. He said that he'd known this guy over weeks and they got on pretty well. He then describes exactly what he looks like and he says, "No, he died in the fire. Did you not hear?" My grandfather kind of shudders. He says he can feel ghosts going through him when he tells this story, and he actually looks quite sad. He doesn't know what it could have been. He said it could have all been in his mind, but how could he have possibly described the person so well, having never met him? It was especially odd. There's another story of his which I'd like to share to you all too. This goes while he was doing his ranger work. Now again, this is back in the day, and they would kind of have them doing virtually everything. My grandpa was pretty up for it though, because this is so long ago that you didn't really have job security, and it wasn't long after the war, so you really took whatever you could. Now he actually had some brothers which went and fought in the war too, but luckily he just avoided it. He had some kind of eye issue and they weren't going to send him out there. He said that on this particular day, he was basically sent to look for some people who had apparently gone missing surveying caves. Now this isn't something my grandpa had any experience in whatsoever. They said to him, "You ever done this before?" And he said, yeah, I've done all kinds of caving in my time. He was completely lying, just he was scared to lose the job. He did have a big piece of rope though, and that's what he was planning to use to go and look for people. Now it's pretty well known today that a lot of missing people actually turn out to have got lost exploring caves and whatnot. Maybe they were just looking for shelter or an escape, but again, back then, they weren't so sure about it. My grandpa then bravely decides to investigate. He said that on this particular day, the sun was only slightly up in the air. It was pretty cold and rainy, and my grandpa was looking towards getting out from the rain and just having a bit of a rest. He knew that he couldn't go too far in the cave, but he was going to give it a good chance. What was worse is all he had basically was a candle for light. He's got the lighter too, which he can use as a backup, so he's not too bothered. Yeah, that guy was braver than I was, I'll tell ya. He eventually comes past some train tracks that he's familiar with. He looks both sides for trains and can't see any, so crosses and proceeds. He had an extremely good knowledge of the area, so he wasn't too worried and didn't bother bringing a map. It was pretty hardcore back then, but to them it was just normal, so I guess that you're just getting on with your job. So he continues trekking and ploughing through the forest, but he doesn't seem to be able to locate the cave at first. Apparently it's really annoying him. He doesn't want to be out there in the dark because he doesn't know if he can definitely navigate back like that. I mean, as long as he finds the train tracks, he knows that he'll be fine. He said that he was walking and then eventually become closer to a river which he was very familiar with, and he felt much better now. He stops for a moment to listen to the sounds of the water, thinking, wow, what if there actually is someone lost in here? How am I going to be able to bring them back if they're not able to move? He was a pretty strong guy, but I guess that he knew his limits too. He finds lots of downed trees here. The storm didn't pass so long ago. My grandpa's convinced that somebody went out here and got lost in the storm seeking shelter from the cave. He's just more worried about keeping his stuff dry though. But eventually, There it is, the mouth of the cave. At first it looks like somebody's standing there, but my grandpa can't be sure. He calls out hello and waves his arms around, but there's no response. He then looks to the ground ahead of himself and jumps over a small stream and proceeds. If there was a person, they're gone now. Maybe they were looking for somebody too, he thinks, as he crosses over. He now enters the mouth of the cave, and he said he tries to light up his candle, but it doesn't work. He tries again, but it just doesn't seem to take, so he decides to go as far in as he can without being able to see. He calls out hello a few more times, and there's no reply once more. He gets to pretty much the limit and stops for a while, trying to get the candle to light. He's not stupid, he's trying his very best to preserve the lighter fluid that he has. He knows that thing wasn't full, and he wasn't going to get paid to replace another one. It was his own thing. He decides this is as good a spot as ever to tie himself up with the rope. He can just about see daylight behind him, and he's able to finally get the candle to light. As the light comes on, he can hear something scurrying away. Now he's not entirely sure what this is. At first it sounds like it could have been an animal, but it sounds like a pretty large one. I guess they're trying to get out of the rain too and take some shelter, he thinks to himself. He can hear water dripping too. He knows that he hasn't got much time with his candle, but he proceeds anyway. He said his rope was extremely long. He's been carrying it on his shoulder the whole time, and he knows that this is going to be the limit of where he can explore. So he proceeds and keeps calling out hello but doesn't get a reply. The cave is getting more and more narrow now as he proceeds, and he has to turn a corner. He does so cautiously, making sure that the rope isn't on a jagged edge because he doesn't want it to become cut off. Now he gets deeper into the cave. He's probably about halfway on his rope now, as he slowly takes another piece off his shoulder as he goes deeper and deeper in. Now he gets to a point where he can see some kind of movement just up ahead. He says, "Hey, I'm here to rescue you. Come on, let's go. I don't have much time on the candle." But it seems like every time he gets closer, this person seems to be getting further and further away. He describes them as wearing some kind of black robes or something, or maybe like some kind of nightgown. He said that the clothes appear very ragged, and he can't make out much of them other than that they're very hunched over. They seem to be wearing something on their head, and at first my grandpa thinks it's a bandage. He said, "Come on now," getting annoyed, becoming more and more agitated. He said that he's not ready to risk his life for somebody else, but he really wants to get this job done, so he proceeds. He said that he's running and really chasing after this person. He's getting burnt every so often by the candle. He's holding it backwards to try and stop it going out, but every so often he has to put it back alight again. He then feels a pop. At first he thinks that the rope has become unlocked on something and he's not too bothered. He's quite surprised now though, as he's gone further than he thought he could on the rope. He calls out, "Hey, whoever you are, this is it. If I can't get you soon, then I'm not going to find you." He then goes to pull on the rope and realizes there's a lot of slack on it. He starts to shoulder it again, trying to figure out how far he's got, when something doesn't make sense. He seems to have a lot of rope, more than he remembered bringing, until eventually he pulls very quick, while actually dropping the candle in shock as he realizes that the rope's come off. God. He fumbles around for a second, but luckily sparks his lighter again, giving him just enough visibility to see where he is. He now realizes that something or someone has bit through part of the rope. He says, "God, these rats are annoying," thinking it was those, as he then hears something behind him. He then turns around to face whatever it is but can't see anything, and throws the rope on the ground now. He decided to set fire to it. Now he said he was doing so he's able to light his way a bit better, dragging it behind him. Yeah, he was a pretty cool guy, very ingenious in situations like this. The only problem though was he knew the air quality wasn't very good down here and he was burning the last air that he probably had, but he wasn't going to be able to get his way out otherwise, and he could probably smell the burning parts to figure out where he come from. So once more, my grandpa proceeds going the way that he'd come. He realizes something's very off now, and he can't describe the feeling. He always tells me that his biggest regret was not buying a rifle or some kind of weapon to bring with him. The problem is, if he shot it in a cave though, he probably would have went deaf, but he couldn't hear well to begin with. So he starts walking, but eventually the light goes out again, and eventually he drops the rope. It's burning for a little bit, then just won't seem to take anymore. Then he feels something on his shoulder. It's like something's touched him that feels weird and feathery, or maybe like moss brushing on his shoulder. He goes to swipe it off when he feels a hand. He gasps loudly and turns around to see what it is, but he can't find anything there. He can suddenly feel water on his back, and he thinks maybe he's got wet somehow. The candles are now completely out, and he's down to his lighter only. He does start to panic now, he admits finally, as he feels something on his ankle. As he turns to go away, something grabs at him. He's pretty sure it's the rope, so he just kicks and eventually becomes free from it. But now his leg feels wet. That was confusing. He gets up and starts running, turning on the lighter every few seconds to be able to see where he's going. Then crash. He goes straight into a rock. He said that when he woke up, he was extremely disorientated and wondered if he'd actually slept outside. He said he felt absolutely horrible. He said he felt something on his leg, and at first he thought it was a rat trying to eat him, so he kicks down very hard. He then feels something hard and hears a screech. He then quickly reaches for the lighter and can't find it, but then he finds it again and flicks it on. He said he was face to face with something, bent over trying to literally eat at him. He doesn't know if it's a crazy cannibal or what it is because he never saw its face, but there was something green on its head. He's always been fixated on that one fact. He said, how was it green? The maybe inch or so of flesh that he saw was disgusting looking, necrotic and rotting. He said he screamed, thinking that he's just run into Satan himself, and starts running, again using his lighter to guide his way. He said that he doesn't know how he found his way out, but he gets back to roughly where he started and he can see the edge of his rope. He picked it up and threw it behind himself, not sure if he was being chased or not. He said that as he got out of the mouth of the cave, it becomes clear that he's bleeding a lot, but he said that there was too much powerful emotions running, so he was able to keep up the pace. As he leaves the mouth of the cave, he hears something. There's some kind of movement behind him, but he doesn't bother to check what it was. He said he somehow got back to the train tracks in about 20 minutes, running through the rain. He was really worried and told me that he knew he's going to have to get maggots to stop an infection. Yeah, this was back in the day, like I said, so medicine wasn't quite so advanced then, and that's something he had been doing for a while, with other kinds of infections that he couldn't seem to treat. He said that he runs and eventually gets back to the other guys, screaming in pain. He said that they tended to his wounds and put some kind of lotion thing on it, and it was horrible. I think it was like iodine or something, for which made it really sting. He put a sock in his mouth to bite down on as they done it, and they screamed, "What happened?" He explains what had happened, and they look at him very scared. They thought that maybe the rats had got him, but he was convinced it was something different. On his shoulder and other parts of his body were deep gouges too, which were clearly caused by some kind of blade or large animal, but it seems more like a tear mark than a clean wound. He said that he couldn't stop shaking, and he went to the priest straight after to have an exorcism. Apparently, a lot of the other guys there and some of the locals actually all grabbed torches the next day, had some priests, and went down to the cave to try and take out the demon which lived in there. Well, they only got to the mouth of the cave, and the priest declared that whatever was in there was gone now. And they all went back and head back, very happy with this, and my grandpa said that he was also happy with this fact too. Apparently over the years, there were sightings of someone or something just lurking around in the centre of the cave, never actually coming out too far to be seen, but visible. All my life, my grandfather has proclaimed that that was the devil that he encountered in the cave, and the exorcist got rid of it. But I just wonder, what on earth could that have actually been? What attacked my grandpa that day? My grandfather was a park service ranger, and he would always tell me these stories. Apparently, on the plot of land that he owned, there was some kind of weird figure that would appear every so often. Now, you couldn't ask him exactly what it was and get necessarily a clear answer, because it would change from time to time. He basically wasn't sure exactly what it was, and each time he would describe it different, usually using the different emotions of which he felt while spotting it. Exactly the same thing would happen with my grandma. Sometimes it was like this thing was angry, sometimes it was like it was hurting, sometimes it was like it was lonely, and sometimes it was like it was lost. But one thing was sure, they always reported seeing it, and it actually gone back to their parents and grandparents. Now apparently there was some kind of ancient burial site upon this land, and I didn't know about it until I got older. But allegedly, there have been multiple sightings of something tall, skeletal in appearance, which apparently would roam the land randomly. The first time of which it was sighted was near the small river and the lake that's on the back of their property. Apparently, it was seen virtually hovering across the water by my great-grandpa. Apparently he was hunting one day and stopped for a while to rest by it when he saw this thing. Apparently it scared him so much that he actually tried to fire shots at it. He said either he had the worst aim in the world that day, or that thing was some kind of spirit and the shots were going through it. He didn't know. He was so scared that he actually left his gun there. It was out of ammo by that point, but he wanted to get away as quick as possible and not necessarily carry any dead weight whatsoever. The next time it was spotted was by his wife a few years later. Apparently she was out trying to pick wild berries on their property one day when she could see a skeletal head staring at her from behind a tree. At first she thought it was some kind of animal that had died there many years ago and they hadn't realised, but then she said the thing moved. So weird sightings actually come from their guests too, and not only them. Even all the way up to my grandpa. Apparently my grandpa first realised it was there when he was there during one Christmas. And apparently he was out playing with some of the other kids and he noticed a strange gown. He said this time it was red in colour, which was weird because usually it appears as black. At first he thought it was a tree, or at least the stump of a tree, of which was different colour to the rest of the woods, until he realised it was moving and he can see a face. The way that he describes it, now God bless him, he doesn't have much knowledge of Star Wars, but he said it looked like one of the characters with 4 lightsabers. I can't remember the specific name, but you know the one when it's got its hood up, but if it was red. From the sounds of that story, I was pretty creeped out by my grandpa, but then he says there was more. Apparently, there was another time that he was playing with his friends, and he actually saw multiple of this thing. Weirdly, apparently it also had glowing orange eyes. That's how he noticed there was more than one. He can't say for absolute certain because it was quite dark at this time, but he's pretty convinced it was, and they weren't isolated incidents. Now, I actually spent a lot of time out of there. I ended up spending quite a lot of time to just get away from my parents. At least that's what I think they were doing. My grandparents had a lot of time to look after me, so I was often there. My memory of my grandparents was absolutely loving. Like, I honestly couldn't have asked for better grandparents who were more loving or caring. It's something I don't think I really appreciated so much when I was young, actually, because they were kind of always there. So it's something that I kind of got a better appreciation for and grasp as when they weren't here, which I always regretted. But anyway, so I remember taking some walks there during the summertime when I was a bit younger. I've grown up with these stories pretty much all my life, so probably about 8 or 9 out of 10 times that I'd actually go out there, I was half expecting to have some kind of horrifying encounter. Though it never really happened, I actually went out there multiple times with an overactive imagination, really wishing that something would happen to me. The stupidest thing I ever did was I actually called for it a few times. Now, I don't know why I actually did this, but again, nothing would happen. I remembered one specific day though when I was out there seemed to be some kind of haze up ahead. It was almost like there was a big filter and there was some kind of fog which wasn't there before suddenly over part of the scenery. I do think to myself that this is particularly weird. It's something I haven't seen before and my young mind can't comprehend it. I had a really weird feeling too, and strangely there was some kind of static in the air which was making the fibres on my jumper stand up and also the hair on my arms and the hair on my head. I looked up scared there was going to be a lightning strike. I've been told about them before. This was before you had the videos to watch on the internet, but I was aware of it. I think maybe they told me in school about it one day, but I digress. I did look up and there was no rain clouds whatsoever. So I think this is specifically weird. It's almost like I'd walked into some kind of electrical storm, of which there was no storm, just the electrical aspects of it. So this was a deeply weird moment. I kind of felt uncomfortable. I've looked up the feeling later on in life and it's similar to what those experience when they're in the vicinity of infrasound. Just a deep unhappiness and feeling that something is off, where your mind and body can't comprehend what's happening. I remembered walking around for a while. I kind of wanted to see the Reaper thing. Every time I said the word Reaper, my grandpa would say, no, that's not it, no. But that's how I described it, and that's how it sounded. So yeah, I was looking for this thing constantly, but nothing would happen, so I headed back. I think this was really odd. I remembered when I got home, my grandparents asked what was wrong with my hair, and I said, I don't know, some kind of storm. They both looked at each other and my grandpa laughed. He knew there wasn't a storm. It was really nice and sunny outside. He thought I was just messing around or something, or had wore one of his hats and not said. He actually brought this up and I said, no, I'm serious. That's what it was. He then laughs and we go about our day. I constantly pester him though to learn more and more about the Reaper. He tells me not to call it that. He describes it as an entity, but I continue with my term. I say, how do you feel when it's there? What happens? He says, I don't know, you just kind of feel off, almost like you're being hunted, and you'll know when that thing is there. You feel like you're being watched. I've had it times where I could look up between two trees and there was something staring at me through them. As I locked eyes, my vision would go blurry and there it would be, that horrible skeleton looking thing. Apparently too, sometimes it would appear with more of a horse head, which actually sounded more scary to me. Whenever you actually got to where it was before, there was also a bad smell allegedly. The thing that I wasn't too scared about though is that apparently it never actually harmed anyone or anything. Well, at least that's what I thought. Apparently, they had a pet dog there before which everybody loved. It was a really nice Labrador and it would roam the land freely. However, one night the dog didn't come back and they start to panic a little bit. They think, oh god, what if this dog has actually gone into the river and drowned? Then one of the neighbours actually reported seeing something by it, and the description sounded like our dog or an animal very similar to it. So worried, we decide to head over and see what's wrong, my grandfather says. When they get there, they can only describe a scene out of a horror film. Apparently the dog was there, but it was entirely drained of blood, and there were some bite marks near its neck. I don't know what kind of creature could have possibly done that. I just knew that it was one that I did absolutely not want to encounter, now or at any point in the future. So what did you do, Grandpa? I buried it, very deep in the ground. He said weirdly though, no flowers seemed to grow around there, or plants, or anything, not even moss. I now feel a little more unsettled and I start to sweat a little bit as I'm uncomfortable in my chair. I actually felt quite stressed out by hearing that. I can see by the look in my grandpa's face that he wishes that he didn't tell me that, and I was probably too young to hear it. He says, "Now son, listen to me. Don't be scared to go out of there. Haven't seen it for years, it could have been anything." I mean, that was kind of a back in my day thing. Now you're probably safe out there. Yeah, great, I thought. I could not stop thinking about this thing. The problem was too, like I said, this is back in the day when that you can only really research things through libraries or actually seeing them and experiencing things. But again, I'm not going to go to the library. And why not explore? For a couple of weeks I actually refused to go out through the forest, but eventually the curiosity and inquisitive part of me took over. So I head out once more. I'm going down a trail and walking down quite a steep incline. My grandpa was supposed to repair stairs here, but he hasn't. Well, kind of more like board decking, but it's quite annoying really. I eventually make it down and I get my white shoes very dirty. I'm just going to wash them off in the lake later on though, I think. Now, as I continue down doing my exploring, I'm pretty convinced nothing is going to happen when I see something odd. I can see a hand moving behind a tree. It's a very white hand too at that. It almost looked impossibly white. Then the clouds move behind the sun and I can see that it's kind of like a dark yellow colour. That's odd. It looks extremely skinny. I thought maybe it was some kind of animal. It kind of looked more like a chicken leg, I guess, than anything, but I didn't dare get closer to it as I saw one of the thumbs move in. I'm now not sure if what I was looking at was some kind of caterpillar or something similar to that, as I start to make my slow retreat to get away from it. I think it's weird. Just as this happens, that weird static starts to pick up in the air again and I can taste a metallic thing in my mouth. I don't know what it is, but I have a cold sweat now. And I quickly head back to my grandpa's. I decided not to say what had happened because I wasn't likely to be allowed out again if I said that I've gone off exploring on my own without telling anyone. My excuse for going out there was something much different, so I knew it wouldn't necessarily sit well if they'd found out what had actually happened. So now, I just go to bed. But I can't stop thinking of it. There was just something odd about it. I had no idea what I'd seen at that time, and that part of me was eating me up. So I decided to do another adventure. Now this is the following day. I go to the exact spot where the hand is, and while I'm walking there, I can't get the possibilities out of my head. I wish I had somebody else there with me to go exploring with, but I think my grandpa's going to be annoyed if I tell him. He was also doing some work on the cars now. He'd actually made me promise him before that I wouldn't go out there too far on my own, and I made a promise and I wasn't going to break that because it would upset him. I was being brave though. I was just hoping I wouldn't end up like the dog. Now I make it to the exact tree where I saw the hand, and weirdly, some of the ground below it seems to have died. It's almost like you've got all these perfectly healthy trees everywhere, but suddenly, on this specific one, just where the hand was, it seems like it's just dead, like loose bark. And also the ground doesn't have any plants which seem to be surviving. I do check a couple of times to make sure that this is actually the exact same tree, and it turns out that it is, which again is super weird for me. I'm not sure what to think of it. I decide to explore further and further. Now I do this for quite a long time, because eventually the sun starts to set and I now realise that it's time for me to get back. That's when I noticed something strange that I didn't before. There's some kind of pile of sticks in the ground that wasn't there before. I initially thought it was my grandpa making some kind of bonfire or something, so I'm actually more confident and happy in this moment. I'm expecting to see him and to go and say hello to him and to have a little explore around together. Well, I get closer and closer and I realise that something is quite odd actually. It seems like this little pile is not sticks, they're bones. Now I don't know where these bones could have possibly come from. I go to pick one up, but I'm froze there for a second. Something just felt odd, and I have that strange feeling coming over me again. Like something is odd, and something bad might be about to happen. Now it sounds very similar to what my grandpa described, with the feelings of everything. And I notice this is strange. The pile was probably about 2 feet tall, and I thought that was extremely weird. I then head back. I don't get too far back when I hear some kind of language spoke. I thought maybe it was somebody from a foreign place, but it sounds different. It's almost like very loud deep sounds in a quick succession which then stop, and some kind of growling type sound. I'm froze there trying to see where this is coming from, and I just cannot find it. Now I decide to turn away from this. I don't want to scare myself. It's getting dark and I'm not far away from getting in trouble with my grandpa and my grandma and my parents, and I don't want to have to suffer the consequences of that. So I continue bounding along until I'm halfway back. I don't hear the sounds again, but I think this is rather odd. Then, as I'm halfway back, I see something from behind a tree, which I can't describe. Somebody steps out who I'd have to describe as about 7 feet tall, wearing a very flowing gown. And I look up, and I can see dark holes where eyes are supposed to be, and I see the face of a skeleton, and something animated moving around with it. It's not moving normally, it's kind of dancing, zigzagging from side to side, almost like it's glitching for a second. I say, huh? I say grandpa, thinking that it's him somehow, but it isn't. I look around and everything seems so dark, and it sounds like a storm's about to pick up. I'm froze there for a while, as this thing seems to slowly edge towards me. It's very hard to tell what direction that it's actually going in, because it kind of moves backwards before it goes forward. I decide to walk further down. I'm actually closer to home this way to see if this thing's following me, and it seems to. I was honestly awestruck by this. I didn't immediately connect the dots of what I was seeing to what my grandpa had described before, and other members of my family, but I moved down a bit further now. This thing was moving extremely slow. I mean, probably like quarter of my walking speed. For a good 5 or 10 minutes, I kept changing directions to see if this thing would stop following me, but it wasn't. It was getting closer and I didn't realise it at first, until I can see more and more detail. This thing looked just like the Reaper, just as I thought, and now the cards all fell on me at once. I scream and start running, and just like in your dreams, I seem to run extremely slow. I don't know where this was actually. I still don't to this day, but my legs were probably so scared that I couldn't run with any kind of pace whatsoever. So I'm left there trying desperately to get away from this thing, going slow as anything, and I seem to be not going much quicker myself. I heard snapping sounds now too. They're very loud, almost like gunshots, but it sounded like something was snapping in half constantly. I eventually make it back towards where my grandparents' house is. I was absolutely covered in sweat, and my grandma finds me and says, "God, did you go swimming?" I say no, and I can't let out the words. I eventually get back in, and she punishes me and tells me off for going swimming in the lake. I get told to bath off quickly, and that I better explain to my grandpa why I was swimming out there. I'm stuck in the bath, literally shivering, It was a hot bath too. That's how scared I was. When I saw my grandpa, I actually didn't have the heart to tell him what I was doing and what I saw. It wasn't until months later that I could actually reveal what happened and why I wouldn't go out of the house and why I was so scared that night. He then looks at me and says, "I know what you saw, son, just please don't go out there again." And I agreed. I never did. Eventually I got older and completely forgot about the experience. That was until I had a bad dream which reminded me of it. I don't actually believe the Reaper's a real thing, but I don't know how else to describe what I saw that day. I want you guys to let me know what you think it could have been. I don't know if my incidents were isolated too, but I'm really having nightmares about it again and I want them to stop. I want to get closure to this.